Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Anatomy by Dr. Vijaya. So today's session will be the second part of the cerebellum. So please do watch my first part where I have covered the anatomical organization, the microarchitecture and the blood supply of the cerebellum. In this part 2 of neuroanatomy of cerebellum, we'll be learning the major pathways, the functions and disorders related to the cerebellum. So in part 1, I had mentioned the divisions, the multiple ways of divisions of cerebellum. One is the anatomical division, where the cerebellum is divided into anterior, posterior and flocculonodular lobe. The next is the functional division, where the cerebellum has been divided into vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum and cerebrocerebellum. The other classification is by evolution, which is archicerebellum, paleocerebellum and neocerebellum. So functional connections, the archicerebellum, which is connected to the vestibular nuclei, they are interconnected. So mainly the flocculonodular lobe of the cerebellum is connected with the vestibular system. So I had mentioned in my previous video that this is mainly concerned with the status of the head region, the eye movements, okay, so mainly control the eyes and the position of the head. So archicerebellum, so this part of the cerebellum is very well developed in birds since they fly, okay, so where they are able to control the eye and the position of their head. And the vestibular nuclei are mainly, they are connected to the structures which are present in the inner ear, the semicircular canal, the utricle, saccule, all those are connected with the vestibular system. The next is the paleocerebellum, which is the spinocerebellum, where the anterior lobe of the cerebellum with the spinal cord, so they are connected with that. So mainly they are concerned with the status of the axial musculature in order to maintain the muscle tone, especially as I mentioned that cerebellum indirectly influences the activity of that is the contraction of the muscles to execute the movement. So it mainly helps in the action of the muscles which has to contract during any particular movement. Along with that, there should be relaxation of the antagonist muscles. So it mainly maintains the degree of flexion or extension at a given point in time, at a time when a particular action has to be executed. Okay, so it mainly helps in planning and execution of the motor movements. Then the next neocerebellum, which is mainly connected with the cerebral cortex, cerebrocerebellum. So the posterior lobe of the cerebellum is the one which is mainly connected to the cerebral cortex. So they are concerned with the overall planning, organization and coordination of the motor movements. So mainly it includes the paramedian or the intermediate region. The paramedium is also with the spinal, but for the overall execution and planning and organization. So even the paramedium or the intermediate region of the cerebellum, and along with that the lateral hemisphere, okay. So both the zones are connected to the cerebral cortex. So they form the neocerebellum or cerebrocerebellum. So they mainly overall they help in the planning of all movements, and also they correct the errors. And cerebellum is connected with the rest of the nervous system through a highway called as the peduncles. Okay, so there are three main peduncles: superior, middle and inferior. Superior peduncle is mainly connected with the midbrain, then middle peduncle with the pons, and inferior peduncle with the medulla oblongata. So among the three, middle is the largest one. The middle cerebellar peduncle, the largest of all the three peduncles, and it has the largest nerve pathways in the brain. So it is a one-way traffic. That means it has only afferent axons. Okay, so you don't see any axon fibers moving out from the cerebellum. So you only see all the fibers which are entering the cerebellum. Okay, so that's why it is a one-way traffic. So all the fibers enter to the cerebellum. So you will be seeing lot of afferent axons. So it contains around 20 million axons on each side. It exclusively contains afferent axons from the opposite cerebral cortex. Okay, so they dissociate. So mainly the afferent axons from opposite cerebral cortex, they enter. So that is the corticopontine fibers. So once they come to the basilar part of the pons, so through the middle cerebellar peduncle, so they enter the cerebellum. The next is superior peduncle. So here it is predominantly one-way traffic, but you can see both the fibers. So predominantly it has efferent fibers which is running away from the cerebellum, but it also has one afferent fibers, that is the ventral spinocerebellar tract, also called as anterior spinocerebellar tract. I had informed in my earlier video, that is the video where I have done about the tracts of the spinal cord, and also in the neuroanatomy of the brainstem, I have explained about these tracts, spinocerebellar tract. You can go through for the details. Okay, so there are three main spinocerebellar tract which carries the information from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. Okay, so the three are the posterior spinocerebellar, anterior or ventral spinocerebellar, and cuneo spinocerebellar. So these are the three main tracts which carries unconscious proprioception, touch, pressure. So all those are received by the cerebellum from the spinal cord. So the ventral spinocerebellar tract, they go until the midbrain, and through superior peduncle they enter the cerebellar cortex. Okay, so the rest of the fibers which you see in the superior peduncle is mainly efferent fibers which are coming from the cerebellum and goes to the opposite cerebral cortex, and also it goes to the red nucleus which is present in the midbrain. The next is the inferior peduncle. This is the smallest of all the three peduncle. It has two-way traffic, that is it has both fibers, afferent and efferent fibers. So they don't have a, when you see the cerebellum, they don't have a direct connection. I had mentioned earlier, direct connection to the spinal cord. So they don't have a direct control over the lower motor neurons. So it is through, they send the information to the brainstem and to the cerebral cortex, and indirectly it influences in the voluntary movements. So contains afferent as well as efferent fibers between cerebellum and brainstem nuclei, so which are vestibular nuclei, reticular nuclei present throughout the brainstem, spinal cord, okay, not directly, okay, through the other nuclei, and these are predominantly ipsilateral. Okay, so they mainly, as I mentioned, cerebellum controls the same side of the body. Each hemisphere, each cerebellar hemisphere controls same side of the body. So there are no direct outputs to the spinal cord. So there is no cerebellospinal tract. So to summarize, the major afferents to the cerebellum, so the major fibers which are entering the cerebellum are coming, one from the spinal cord, that is the three spinocerebellar tracts. Then they get input from the brainstem. They also get input from the cerebral cortex. So what are those fibers? Dorsal spinocerebellar, also called as posterior spinocerebellar, ventral spinocerebellar, and cuneo cerebellar. So these are the tracts. So which this table summarizes the origin, the target, and the function. Okay. So all these spinocerebellar tracts, so mainly the ventral and dorsal, so they take their origin is from the nucleus dorsalis, that is the Clark's column in the spinal cord. Okay, and the target is to the anterior lobe, mainly helping in maintaining the tone. Okay, so that they should receive the information of the position of the joint. Okay, so the unconscious kinesthetic from the ipsilateral lower limb comes through dorsal spinocerebellar. Then this is also from the lower limb, mainly the trunk and the lower limb passes through this and from the lower limb it's through ventral spinocerebellar, and from the upper aspect, that is the upper limb and the head and neck area, so which is through cuneo-cerebellar tract. So cuneo-cerebellar, so they relay in the accessory cuneate nucleus, which is present in the medulla oblongata, okay, and they enter the cerebellum through inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, so these two through inferior peduncle and this one through superior peduncle. From the brainstem, they receive fibers, very important fiber, climbing fiber, which is from the inferior olivary nucleus. So that's called as olivocerebellar tract. Okay, so from the contralateral inferior olivary nucleus, these fibers originate, they origin, and then they mainly go to the anterior and posterior lobes. So then they mainly send signals to the red nucleus, and from there rubrospinal tract, and the information is taken through rubrospinal tract, which goes to the spinal cord. Okay, as I mentioned, directly it doesn't have a connection to the spinal cord. Then from the vestibular nuclei also, the cerebellum receives information, so which mainly goes to the flocculonodular lobe, because that is related to the vestibulocerebellum. So mainly helps in head and body position signals and the eye movements. They also receive from the reticular nuclei present in the brainstem, which mainly helps in the maintenance of the tone, okay, the muscle tone. So all these fibers pass through inferior cerebellar peduncle. So here you can see the picture shows the different pathway. The blue one represents the red nucleus. This is the red nucleus which is present in the midbrain. Okay, so from there the fibers goes to the inferior olivary nucleus. Okay, and from inferior olivary the information is conveyed to the cerebellum. Okay, then you can also see the red one represents the deep pontine nuclei, which is coming from the pons, which goes to the cerebellar cortex. Then the green one represents the reticular formation, the vestibular nuclei, and the information from the reticular nuclei. Okay. The next afferent, major afferent, is from cerebral cortex. So you already know corticopontocerebellar. So from the contralateral cerebral cortex, it goes to the deep pontine nuclei, and from there the informations are conveyed to the cerebellum, which mainly goes to anterior and posterior lobes. Okay, and the signals are from contralateral cerebral cortex. So this mainly goes through middle peduncle. Olivocerebellar tract, so again it is from the inferior olivary nucleus, but the inferior olivary nucleus receives information from the red nucleus. You can ask, the red nucleus is mainly in the midbrain, but red nucleus also receives information from the higher centers, okay, mainly from the cerebral cortex. From there it goes to inferior olivary nucleus, okay, and then the signal is passed to the cerebellum. Okay, so mainly the signals are coming from the contralateral cerebral cortex, but these fibers pass through inferior peduncle. So these are the major afferents which are going to the cerebellum. So among these afferents, as I mentioned earlier in my previous video, all the fibers will form mossy fibers except the one which is coming from inferior olivary nucleus. They form the climbing fibers. Okay, so these are the two fibers present in the white matter, the climbing fibers and the mossy fibers. So both the fibers are carrying excitatory neurotransmitters. So here you can see the picture shows corticopontine fibers, and from there it goes to the pons, and from pons the informations are conveyed to the cerebellum. So here you can see the anatomical and functional organization of the cerebellar cortex, which I have already dealt in my first video, that is in the microarchitecture, the histology of the cerebellum. So mainly the one which is the functional organization, which is seen in the granular layer. So where you can see the formation of glomerulus, okay, which is mainly there will be a mossy fiber rosette that forms the focus of the cerebellar glomerulus, and along with the mossy fiber rosette, it has dendrites of many granule cells. Then it also has the proximal aspect of the Golgi cell dendrites and the axons of the Golgi cells. Okay, so these all structure will form the cerebellar glomerulus, which mainly maintains a balance between inhibition and excitation. Okay, so mossy fibers, as I mentioned, it is mainly excitatory in nature because they release glutamate, which is an excitating neurotransmitter. So climbing fibers arising from inferior olivary nucleus excites the single Purkinje cell. As I mentioned in my earlier video, it is a highly specific snipper type. Okay, so mainly it excites a single Purkinje cell. So they wrap around the dendrites of the Purkinje cells in the molecular layer. The neurotransmitter released is believed to be aspartate, again excitatory in nature. Climbing and mossy fibers have collaterals, again, though they have a synaptic connection with the Purkinje cells. So climbing fibers have direct connection, but mossy fibers, they influence the Purkinje cell through the granule cells. Okay, they also have collaterals, okay, excitatory inputs to the deep cerebellar nuclei, so that there should be a balance between excitation and inhibition. Okay, so accordingly the muscular movements are coordinated and planned. So this is the functional properties of the cerebellum. So how the inhibition of granule cells will take place. So mainly granule cells excites the Purkinje cells through their parallel axon fibers. Okay, but even the granule cells have to be controlled, because if it is not controlled, there will be overexcitation of the Purkinje cells, which will have inhibitory action on deep cerebellar nuclei, because Purkinje cells they release a neurotransmitter which is GABA, okay, which is a inhibitory in nature. So there are two mechanisms. One is feed forward inhibition, the other one is feedback inhibition. So feed forward inhibition, the mossy fibers directly excites the Golgi cells, and Golgi cells again they release inhibitory neurotransmitter which controls the granule cells. Okay, so mossy fibers directly, they have collaterals which will stimulate the Golgi cells. So once Golgi cells are stimulated, they release inhibitory neurotransmitter which is mainly inhibiting the actions of granule cells. Okay, this is direct feed forward inhibition. The other one is feedback inhibition, where the mossy fibers first excites the granule cells. Okay, and these granule cells have synaptic connection with the Golgi cell through parallel fibers. So where these are the, if you can see here, the granule cells, the axons, they have parallel fibers which goes to the molecular layer and form a kind of synaptic connection with the dendritic spines of the Purkinje cells. So when they are ascending up, okay, so they have small collateral, small connection with the Golgi cells as well. Okay, so through that, since the granule cells have connection, those parallel fibers are having connection with the Golgi cells, so this will, since granule cells have the release excitatory neurotransmitter, okay, so this will stimulate the Golgi cells, and in turn Golgi cells again inhibit the actions of granule cells. So this is feedback inhibition. So one is feed forward, where mossy fiber have action on Golgi cells and the Golgi cells inhibits granule cells. In feedback, the mossy fibers excites the granule cells, then granule cells will stimulate the Golgi cells, and in turn Golgi cells will have an inhibition on granule cells. Okay, so these are the two mechanisms which mainly controls the actions of granule cells. Now coming to the major efferents from the cerebellum. So the major efferents are mainly coming from the three zone. You already know the functional division: vermal region, paravermal or paramedian region. The other one is from the lateral zone or the lateral region. From these three regions, the efferent fibers are passed to the different parts of the central nervous system. So from vermis and from the flocculonodular lobe, which goes through, the fibers goes through vestigial nucleus, all should pass, the efferent fibers are all arising from the deep cerebellar nuclei. Okay, so this has connection with the vestigial nucleus. From there efferent fibers arise. They mainly project to the, as you know, vermis mainly helps in the control of the balance, posture. So they mainly project, they have a connection with the vestibular nucleus and also to the reticular formation. So it is mostly bilateral. So they mainly help in coordinating the posture, then the muscle tone, the proximal muscle and the truncal muscles. Okay, the truncal muscles includes the head and neck area, then it includes the chest and the abdominal area. The proximal group of muscles, upper limb includes shoulder and arm, pectoral girdle, and lower limb it includes hip and the thigh area. Okay, and since it is going to the vestibular nuclei, so they also help in coordination of eye movement. So they mainly have a error corrections. Then if there is a disorder in this region, I have already discussed in my earlier video. So the patient will have difficulty to balance. So they might have a wide ataxic gait whenever you ask that person to walk. So in order to maintain the balance, so he might have a wide ataxic gait, and they lack coordination. There will be incoordination of the movements. Then there will be truncal ataxia, and usually the person might fall to the same side, that is the side of the lesion, and they can have nystagmus, so involuntary oscillatory movements of the eyeball, and then they tend to fall to the lesion side. But you don't see much ataxia in the limbs because it is mainly through paravermal or the lateral zone. So here you can see the connection with the vestibular apparatus and also the reticular system. Paravermal or paramedian region. So this is through the interpositus nucleus, which includes emboliform and globus. So they mainly have efferent fibers. Directly it doesn't send to the spinal cord. So it is through the red nucleus, which is the ipsilateral control. So ipsilateral coordination of posture. So though the crossing occurs, but the crossing occurs twice. So please remember, cerebellum, each hemisphere of the cerebellum controls the same side of the body. Okay, so though there is crossing over, the crossing over occurs twice, so that the control will be on the same side of the body. So there will be ipsilateral coordination of posture and mainly maintenance of the distal muscle tone, especially of the distal area, the hand and the feet, and then coordination of the eye movements as well. So if there is a disorder, the patient might present with limb ataxia, and they whenever you ask to approach an object or any action is the person has to elicit, so they'll have a intention tremor, and they'll have difficulty to do alternate pronation and supination, which is called as dysdiadochokinesia on the ipsilateral side. Okay, so this is also called as appendicular ataxia because it mainly includes the appendicular skeleton. From the lateral region, so the connection is through the dentate nucleus. So dentato-rubro-thalamo-cortical. So from the dentate nucleus, the fibers will go to the red nucleus. From there it goes to the thalamus. Okay, and from thalamus it will go to the cerebral cortex. Okay, cortex via red nucleus and ventrolateral thalamic nucleus. So but it goes to the contralateral cerebral cortex because contralateral cerebral cortex mainly controls the other side of the body. Okay, so it mainly helps in the organization, planning and execution of the movement, the overall movement. So whenever there is a disorder, so definitely the person will have limb ataxia, intention tremor, dysdiadochokinesia, and the pure lateral lesion in the lateral area of the cerebellum may present without obvious motor signs. Okay, so they don't have a proper motor signs. They can do some kind of movement, but there can be incoordination, and they might present with intention tremor and dysdiadochokinesia. Along with that, they'll have one more condition called as dysmetria, because they'll be having difficulty in judging and measuring the movements. Okay, so usually the tests which are done are finger nose test, heel shin test. So all these are done. So the patient might overshoot when they are doing the finger nose test. Okay, so these are some of the tests done to see whether the patient is having any cerebellar lesion. So outflow pathway from the cerebral cortex to the cerebellar cortex. So from the cerebellar cortex, some will go to the red nucleus. Okay, from the red nucleus to rubrospinal, it might be controlled. Some might go to the thalamus. Okay, and from thalamus it goes to the cerebral cortex on the contralateral side, and through corticospinal tract the movements are controlled. Okay, so one is corticospinal, the pyramidal tract, the other one rubrospinal is extrapyramidal tract. So what do you mean by coordination? So coordination is a smooth recruitment where there will be right group of muscles are contracted. There is right order. Okay, so the order is passed to the right group of muscles, and there is a right range. Okay, so the movement should not cross. Okay, so there should be a proper right range. As I mentioned, there should be coordination in the amount. The measurement should be correct. Then right speed, right force, right direction to accomplish a voluntary movement. Okay, so this is the coordination. Okay, so there should be right group of muscles have to contract, and to execute any voluntary movement there should be proper coordination, that is a right order should be there, right range, speed, force and direction should be there, so that the movement occurs in a smooth, coordinated and a fine way. Okay, so this is mainly helped by cerebellum and along with that basal nuclei. So these are some of the key features of cerebellar lesion, which I have already mentioned about these terms. Ataxia, that is incoordination of movement. So it can be truncal ataxia whenever there is vermal lesion, or it can be limb ataxia whenever it is paravermal or paramedian lesion. Intention tremor, so on rest they won't have any shivering, or mainly the distal limbs, there are no tremors, but appears whenever a voluntary movement has to be done. So increases as the task nears the completion, so whenever they have to reach some object, so near to that they'll have the tremors. So typically ipsilateral to paravermal lesion. Dysmetria, which I've already mentioned, finger, nose and heel shin tests will be positive, so they have difficulty to measure, so there won't be right direction, right range. Okay, then dysdiadochokinesia, disturbance in performing alternating pronation and supination in hands. Nystagmus, involuntary oscillatory eye movements when trying to track an object. Then since it maintains the muscle tone, so whenever there is cerebellar lesion there will be loss of muscle tone, that's called as hypotonia, and also the patient might present with pendular knee jerk. Okay, so when a knee jerk is elicited, the leg moves like a pendulum. Okay, oscillatory movement. Okay, so that's called as pendular knee jerk. So these are some of the key features which can be seen in a cerebellar lesion. These are some of the signs. Okay. So truncal ataxia, typically with the vermis. So whenever you ask the patient to walk, so they have a wide based gait, unsteady, they fall back like a drunken like gait, difficulty in sitting straight. Appendicular ataxia, mainly seen in the limbs, typically with intermediate and lateral cerebellar lesions. So ataxia of the extremities. So again, since it controls the same side, the lesions are seen on the ipsilateral side. Okay, ipsilateral to the lesion side. So the compression on the cerebellum or any areas of the cerebellum, which is very common whenever there is intracranial tumors. Okay, So 70% of the adult tumors are seen above the tentorium cerebelli. Okay, so mainly compressing the cerebral cortex, that is supratentorial tumors. And in pediatrics, in small kids and babies, infratentorial tumors are very common. So whenever it is infratentorial, the tumors might have an effect on the cerebellum and the brainstem. So there might be compression on these structures. So these are some of the syndromes related to the cerebellum, cerebellar syndromes by anatomical sites. So if there is hemispheric syndrome, usually one side, so any of the mainly the hemispheres, the lateral hemispheres is involved. So etiology can be a tumor, astrocytoma, or any abscess, or secondary to otitis media related to the ear, okay, or mastoiditis, infection in the mastoid air cells. Okay, so the patient will have ipsilateral cerebellar signs. So they might have leg, arm, or trunk gait ataxia depending upon the hemisphere which is compressed. Okay, past pointing, that is whenever you do finger nose test, they overshoot it, that's called as past pointing. Falling towards the side of the lesion, and you won't see paralysis as I mentioned, because corticospinal tract, all those are normal, but they'll have some of incoordination in the movements, then tremors, and ataxic gait. If there is anterior vermis syndrome, which is very common in adults, especially the adults who are addicted to alcohol, okay, chronic alcoholism, and so this is mainly seen in age between middle to late decades of life. So there will be Purkinje cell atrophy in the rostral vermis. Okay, so vermis is very prone to alcoholic degeneration, and the leg region of anterior lobe of the cerebellum. So these are the areas which can be affected. So features will have the definitely the patient, since the anterior lobe they are involved. So truncal ataxia, dystaxia, okay, will be more compared to the gait. Okay, so truncal ataxia will be there. So even the vermis area, since it is involved, so the patient will have difficulty to maintain the balance. Okay, the other type of syndrome, that is the posterior vermis syndrome, very common in pediatric age group, so which is mainly due to tumors, the infratentorial tumors, which includes medulloblastoma, ependymoma. Okay, so this is mainly as always seen in children. So here it mainly involves flocculonodular lobe. So when flocculonodular lobe is involved, you know that it has a connection with the vestibular system in maintaining the balance, the head movement, and eye movement. So definitely the child will have truncal dystaxia, where the child has difficulty to have a steady gait. They have a falling forward or backward, cannot maintain the balance, can't hold the head steady, stumbling gait, and they'll have frequent falls. Okay, since this tumor blocks the ventricle, so you can see here this is medulloblastoma, so they have a compression on the ventricles over here. Due to increase in the intracranial pressure, the child will present with early morning projectile vomiting, morning headache, severe headache. Okay, and they also present with papilledema, so which is the papilledema is a optic disc swelling, which is mainly caused due to increase in the intracranial pressure. Okay, and they also present with abducens nerve palsy. So now you might be thinking, how come abducens nerve is related over here? So this is a false localizing signs where the dysfunction is distant from the site of the pathology. Okay, so the pathology is near to the cerebellum and the ventricular area, but still but you are seeing the child might present with this palsy. So this is a kind of false localizing neurological sign, so where the dysfunction is distant from the site. Okay, it is not at that particular area where the abducens nerve is nuclei is present, but it is distant from the site of the pathology. This is why, because the abducent nerve has a long intracranial course. Okay, so there might be, due to increase in the pressure, there might be slight stretching on the nerve, abducent nerve, which will have a effect on the lateral rectus muscles. Abducent nerve mainly supplies the one of the eyeball muscle, that is the lateral rectus. So due to this, the child might have double vision, diplopia. Okay, so these are the few signs and symptoms related to the cerebellar lesion. So that's about the clinical aspects related to the cerebellum. So these are my references. So that completes the neuroanatomy of the cerebellum. Thank you for watching.